Hello and welcome to another episode of Talking Faith, the weekly devotional where we spend a little bit of time just reflecting over the words of Scripture together. And hopefully, by doing that, we can continue to grow in a relationship with God together as a family here at Killiman. This week, we're going to be finishing off the book that Jen Weckland wrote called In His Image, and we're going to be looking at the last characteristic that she brings out, that being God being a wise God. So today, we're going to be continuing down that thought, but just before we do, I'd just like to say over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be doing something a little bit different here on a Monday on the Killiman Facebook and YouTube page. We're going to be doing a mini series that Alan and I are calling Questioning Christmas. Alan and I have recorded some answers to questions that young people have here at Killiman, and we're wanting to present that before you each Monday on the lead up to Christmas, and we hope that you find that helpful as we seek to tackle difficult questions that might emerge when it comes to the concept of Christmas. So hopefully that is something that you'll be able to get linked into and you'll enjoy. But for now, I urge you to get yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and simply join us as we continue talking faith together. And all Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king, because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to do justice. Who is wise and understanding amongst you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. Today, we're thinking a little bit about the last of the characteristics that Jen Weckland brought out in her book, and that being God being a wise God. Wisdom is something that I have always sought to have within my life. And let's be honest, is something that I think we all definitely need. The way that I would potentially explain it is wisdom to me seems to be taking scope of a situation and knowing how to do right or wrong in that situation. There seems to be a long time when I was growing up where I fully lacked wisdom. I wasn't very wise. I would go and do pretty much the wrong thing every time whenever I had the opportunity. And I saw myself time and time again going to people within my church that I trusted, seeking their advice. One of those people, or two of those people, I suppose, being firstly Brian Gooding, who was the minister at Killiman that seemed to just be the epitome of wisdom. But then secondly would be the youth worker, his son David, both of which were wise people. And I could never really figure out why they seemed so wise. However, I would go to them seeking advice quite often. And every single time they seemed to give me good advice, they put me back onto the right path. And I just kind of couldn't figure it out. Why were they so wise and I wasn't? After a while of pondering over that question, I remember a friend of mine just suggesting that I start to read parts of the Old Testament, not linked into my asking of how can I be more wise, but he just knew that my Old Testament knowledge wasn't great. So I started reading bits and pieces of scripture and came across King Solomon, the second God-chosen king in Israel. And he was two things he was really known for. Firstly would be his wisdom, and secondly would be his wealth. And I remember reading through it, and there's a moment where God offers him anything. He says, "Is there anything you want and I will give it to you?" And Solomon asks for wisdom so that he can best rule God's kingdom as God would see fit. And God grants it. You see, in that moment, I realized the crucial step to being wise, because King Solomon knew no matter how smart or wise he was, the beginning of true wisdom comes from God, not from us. So I think that links in right back to Genesis chapter 3 as we see Adam and Eve rebelling against God because they eat from that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Essentially what they're saying is, I want to choose the best course of action for my life. I want to live on my own wisdom, not on yours. And that led to, it led to sin. It led to everything that we experience here on a regular basis. Essentially, the beginning of sin started with seeking your own wisdom over God's. And I think what we see from King Solomon here is the beginning of true wisdom comes from seeking God's wisdom in our life over our own. Ever since I read this of King Solomon, I've been seeking to be more wise. And the way I've been doing that is by praying to God every day that he will make me wiser. And I'm not going to lie, I am very glad that I've done that, because as I've matured in my faith, people have come to me seeking wisdom, putting me in the same position that I maybe one day put Brian and David all those years ago. And my goal in these situations is to guide people towards God, because I understand that I'm not wise. God is wise. And that's the challenge, I believe, for all of us Christians, to seek God's wisdom in our own life so that we can benefit from it. But then secondly, to seek it in our own life so we can share it with others so they can benefit from it. So they can hear the advice that you think God is passing from you through to them, so that they can go on to lead godly lives. Because that's the whole point. We're called to live godly lives. That is a wise life, so that we may better live with him and for him, knowing that his calling for our life is the most important thing. I can just imagine how strong the community here at Killamant would grow if we all accept God's will in our life and seek that wisdom day in and day out. Hopefully this has been an encouragement to you this morning or whenever you're watching, and I hope that you'll pray just as I do, that God's wisdom will fill your life, so that when those difficult situations come, you know how to act because he is right by your side. God bless.